Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly, sponsored by SignalWire. This week, Fred Posner is joining us to tell us everything about what has been up to, long-term voiceover IP consultant and friend of the voiceover community all over. Thank you for joining us today, Fred.
Oh, great to see you, Luke, as always. I miss seeing you in person.
For the three people that haven't met you before, could you give us a quick introduction about yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Fred Posner. I've been doing this for 20 years or so now.
A while.
Yeah, a while. I like to make a fat joke that I'm a big fan of open source, and I've loved every minute that I've been in this community. It's the open source VoIP community is some of my favorite people that I've ever met in my life, and uh, it's just a wonderful honor to be a part of it. I started out with OpenSARE and Asterisk using those. I was really excited when FreeSWITCH launched and started playing with that after meeting West at an Astricon and him telling me, I don't know why you haven't installed FreeSWITCH yet. And I'm like, I don't, probably because I'm just hearing about it now for the first time. And ever since then, I've been a big fan of FreeSWITCH as well. And just love working with all of these systems. I've focused mostly on doing Kamailio probably for the last 10 years. I'm extremely honored to be part of that project. And so I do have a bias towards Kamailio in my deployments and trying to keep things away from any kind of PBX as much as possible. But when those do come in, it's always nice to have friends in the community to help out. And about 2 years ago, we launched. I helped develop API ban, which I felt was needed to block unwanted SIP traffic from reaching people, and so there's that going on as well. And it's a free service, so that was my way of giving back.
So why don't we start by this latter service that you mentioned? What's the general usage? What are use cases? How many people do you have on it?
So that's awesome. Thank you. All right. So API ban came from conferences.
Hmm.
So when we were at conferences, we were all talking about how look at all these script kiddies, and especially now that we all know and love Sandro. I huge fan of Sandro, and I joke with him that I get to see. I feel like I get to see him every day because people are using some of his products to just destroy servers left and right, and all the script kiddies out there. And if you have a PBX or a SIP system online, you are going to get hit, period. And you're going to get scanned. And then when you get discovered, then people are going to try to exploit you. And that is sadly a part of life. A lot of people have gone through strong access lists and things like that to try to prevent them. There's ways to block traffic in Kamailio, but all of those are still handled software wise. Even if you then say, oh, okay, here, look, I've identified this guy, let me manually add him to my block list router or have a very exclusive allow list. However you're doing it, there's still that traffic coming to you, and any kind of response that you do from your PBX or SPC or anything like that that results in a negative is still identifying yourself as having a SIP server there. So the idea that we had was, wouldn't it be great if we could all just kind of share some information that we had? And we would talk about this at ClueCon, we'd talk about it at Kamailio World, and all these other conferences. And then we'd have drinks and we'd have a great time, and then real life would happen, and then the next conference we go, oh yeah, I remember that idea we had, and no one would do anything because, as you know, my stack of things that I want to do is enormous.
Mm-hmm.
And the bandwidth that I have, especially as I'm getting older and slower, is so much smaller than the stack of ideas that I want to play with. And at the end of 2019, I had a few weeks where I could just say, you know what, I want to learn Golang, I want to learn or Go, and I want to learn more integration and things like that. So I wrote an API that
so it's
allows
written in
honeypots.
Golang.
Yeah, so the API and the main client are written in Go, and so what happens is there's an API. So that's the whole reason it's called API ban. So there's an API that you can check IPs if it's good or bad, as well as get a list of all the active IPs that are attacking honey. So the simple concept is there's honeypots out there, and they are just being scanned left and right. Thanks to Kamailio, we're also scanning for non-SIP traffic that's hitting SIP servers. We're seeing a tremendous amount of non-SIP traffic being sent to SIP ports. So DNS and other type of traffic that can be amplified, making you very open towards DDoS as well. So we're seeing a tremendous amount of SIP and non-SIP traffic coming in. The honeypot then sends the IP.
Really?
And I'm sorry?
You've seen a lot. So there's always this funny thing where we try and time how long it takes for any SIP service that's exposed to the internet to start getting hack attempts.
It used to be hours, and I think now it's minutes. Some of them I've seen within a minute, which is fantastic when it's a demo. Although normally in the demo is the one that takes it, closer to an
So
hour.
I have to derail conversation a little bit. I have to
Yeah.
ask, since you're an expert, how does that happen? Like, I buy a new server on DigitalOcean or whatever, and I have a fresh FreeSWITCH server that's been running for 2 minutes. I'm already starting getting hack attempts. They're pretty focused too. Like, it's not just random stuff. They're trying specific strings that are usually in default configs, that kind of stuff. How does it even happen?
There are people just scanning blocks of IPs. A lot of it is just, and they use cloud computing a lot. We see DigitalOcean is usually always in the top of um, the IP space that is attacking other SIP servers. So people will just set up something there, set up a script to just scan, every IP address that they can think of or that they
Plus,
want.
blocks are probably known, so it's easier to go by. So I know this block is probably belongs to a VPS host. So eventually, any of those IPs could become a VPS. So I go for that, I suppose.
We're also seeing those attacks on home systems as well. So in just private or not private, but residential IP space that you would have from, let's say, Cox, Comcast, things like that. We're just seeing a tremendous amount of scans hit those, as well as the honeypots we try to put all over. So we do have some honeypots that are just in home residential networks, right? Which are phenomenal. Those are the ones I love because it's just hilarious every time you see what's getting hit. And then you'll also see they're getting hit with SSH. They're getting hit with everything.
Yeah, home networks are probably generally a bit more vulnerable because many people don't really know what they have even.
Exactly. And those really hurt when you think about the application there of having your phone then taken over, and you have a lot of people whose phones are taken over and then used to attack your PBX because it's a valid registration or something like that. You have we have honeypots in most of the major cloud networks, as well as just other networks and data centers and IP spaces throughout the world. The goal was to have them as hidden as possible. They're not known by anyone. We do not want carriers to poison any of the results because some carriers are like that and would absolutely try to poison results in their benefit. And so the whole point was to get good, clean data. An IP that attacks us, we keep quote unquote active for 7 days. So if you attack or if you attack one of the honeypots, and attack means just sending SIP, none of these are legitimate servers. So if you send traffic to SIP traffic or non-SIP traffic to one of these servers, your IP gets flagged for 7 days, and then it can get active, almost immediately on some of them.
Cool. Yeah,
And
there's a lot going on. So there's a couple security questions I have. There's
yeah,
with the cloud computing, open source, etc. There's a lot of people trying a lot of things
mhm.
effectively. What would you suggest a team looking into, I don't know, running their first FreeSWITCH setup or something like that, to be aware of, just so they can operate in a somewhat safe manner when they get started, at least, so they don't get shut down right away, which is
the it's one of those things where you just spent a good time. If it's your first install on FreeSWITCH, you've spent some time looking through it. It's probably you're seeing a lot of things going across your screen like matrix style and everything like that, and you're focused on that. So to then automatically focus on having to lock down your system and all the intricacies that go with that kind of SIP security is daunting, and it's a very difficult task for it. So
I have to say,
this
even
is
as an
where
expert, I sometimes, I run just something I need to test and whatever, and I have a baseline security profile that effectively needs me to take down the machine as soon as I'm done testing. So,
right.
knowing something that's a good starting point will help me too. I'm an application developer, so networking isn't really my best suit.
And that's the thing, is we're getting into to the stage of VoIP where web programmers are doing more than actual network programmers, where 10 years ago you really had to be juggling network and everything. Now you're seeing it where it's mostly just programmers, where you're more focused on that aspect than the network side of it. And allow lists are really nice. So if you just made it so that only your system is going to respond to X, Y, and Z IPs, on that with some of like FreeSWITCH and Asterisk, for example, since they're common here, is that you still usually get a negative response, which kills it. That's where I like in Kamailio that you could just ignore the traffic. So if I see traffic that's coming at me and it's not something that I want, I just ignore it. And the power of something like that. So that's why I highly recommend that everyone put a Kamailio in front of their deployments. But that's also where API ban comes in a little bit, because chances are, it's not going to stop every traffic. If someone knows you and they're going to attack you, that API ban doesn't protect against that, but it protects against these scanners and the results of those scanners dramatically. So if you launch that first, for example, and it's just a simple client that works with your IP tables, so it's not, FreeSWITCH would never see it. FreeSWITCH would never see that traffic. It would just be blocked in IP tables, and life goes on. And so I really like that. If you're running a firewall like pfSense or OpenSense, we do an IP list that you can use in your router. So it could be blocked there and protect your whole network as well. So something like that. But as far as security, I mean, when you're doing these test ones, it's exactly what you're saying. Just put it up, and at that point, it's almost fun. I joked with someone that it's the good way to test if your installation works, is just put it up, and then you'll see somebody will scan it, and you'll see that it responds, and then you know that you have a successful install.
Yeah, it is. It's certainly I feel like, so this comes from a very specific experience I have had a few months ago. A friend was starting to do some. I was playing with FreeSWITCH and Janus. They were trying to build something. Eventually, ended up using an API, but they eventually ended up using an API. Not for the management effort itself, though that was a factor, but they got discouraged by how complicated it was to keep the system healthy. There was,
Yeah.
I mean, if you stand up an Asterisk server with default config, in 5 minutes you have people making calls with your server. If you have a
Yep.
takes 5 minutes,
Absolutely.
and they start dialing out. So there is a place, and I think API ban is really in the right step in the right direction. There's a space in the open source community for a kind of canned setup you can give to someone who is not exactly an expert and tell them, look, at least this is going to allow you to get something working. I always recommend doing fail to ban as the lowest end of security.
Yeah, and so fail to ban was the reason why, because I hate fail to ban. Now, granted,
Yeah.
I respect fail to ban, and fail to ban is absolutely something that is still needed because, again, API ban is not going to protect you from a targeted attack, right?
Yeah.
Where fail to ban will, because it's analyzing your logs. My problem with fail to ban on, especially on prod systems, was just the amount of resources it was using,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and I could never remember how to unblock a damn IP, right? And then you'd have and no user when they're connecting gets the password right because of Murphy's law and everything like that. So they try and then they block themselves, and then you're having to Google how to unblock it. And so API ban really helped me dramatically by reducing the overhead that fail to ban did, because now I'm not getting all this traffic that fail to ban would need to block. That's already blocked well before fail to ban would have to see it. So it improves the performance of fail to ban dramatically, in terms of your resource allocation to fail to ban and
Yeah,
things
even
like
just
that.
the API ban client will get you a lot, and would get you a lot of mileage before you even set up fail to ban. That's probably true. That's
Yeah, yeah, and
so
it blocks it and it works well with it, so it won't fight with it. It makes sure if fail to ban takes away the API ban chain, which fail to ban will do because it's fail to ban. API ban is the client is smart enough to look and see, oh, all right, well, somebody took it away. Let me re-add it and get all the IPs that I need to. So it's smart, and it uses, Go has just been, I don't want to get into religious war of what language is best, and I'm certainly not believing that Go is the best, but it is extremely efficient. It's fast, and the CPU is almost negligent. It's or not negligent is the wrong word, but it's minimal. It's minimal use of CPU, and it's just fast. Integrates right with API. I mean, with IP tables. We also did a local API for you to run if you wanted. It's called
Mhm.
IP tables dash API, and it's a local API that you could run on your own system, that integrates with IP tables, so that if you wanted to block an IP locally, you could do it right from FreeSWITCH, with a curl statement, or just hit it somewhere else. So if you're seeing something that you don't like in your dial plan, or in something, you just have this uh, script to block it immediately.
Yeah, the I think that's a great starting point. Actually, I think it's a good recommendation to start using API ban client instead of fail to ban if you're getting started with. So since you're one of the developers, how often do you get an IP submitted, and how many IPs are in that traffic? And I have to ask, is there any geography to those attackers?
So it fluctuates, which is neat. So the honeypots are constantly getting hit to the point where on many of the honeypots, I put a cache in there so it won't um, just keep hitting, because some of these high powerful scanners might be scanning you 3,000 times. If it's doing an invite attack, it might be doing 3,000 within a minute before you know it. So once the honeypot tells us of an IP, it doesn't tell us about that same IP for several hours. um I would say that generally there's a new IP added anywhere from 7 to 12 minutes on average.
What?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes you might get 10 or 15 within a minute, and then other times it might take an hour to get one. But the average is um,
Yeah, to
one
think
or two every.
IPv4 addresses are almost done for. Like there's a real scarcity going on, so it's mind
Yeah.
blowing. There's
Well,
still so many.
the highest that we've the most active blocks are generally I have the name just I said it just DigitalOcean is one of the most active blocks, as well as Cogent. So those are usually in the top two. For a little bit right around Christmas, Alibaba had their space just being destroying, where they had 300, 400 IPs that were actively attacking
All of
SIP.
them.
Yeah, well, no, I mean they have /8s or something. They
Okay.
have a huge yeah, and so but there was a tremendous amount of traffic coming from two of Alibaba's networks, and both of those were in the US. DigitalOceans are in the US. We do see a lot from Europe and France. I expected more from China and Russia, but it's not. The vast majority that we're seeing that are scanning are US based, European based, France, Netherlands, UK, um, India is always there, but not as active as you'd like, and going from there. But I really did expect to see a lot more from, you would expect China and Russia.
Yeah, Eastern
Yeah,
Europe and China should. Yeah, that's interesting information, because I actually would say, if you asked 10 people from the voice over IP community which areas are the most active in attacking SIP servers, everybody will say Russia and China, or China and Russia. Turns out
yeah.
that's not even true. Like,
Well, and it's a
they
funny
are
because this is
there,
the
but
stepping stone. So how they normally work is they'll first scan you and try to find try to find your server, right? And then once they find the servers, then they use those results, and then those are attacked by other ones, and those will tend to be more from Russia, Ukraine, China, India, France is still always in there, and things like that, as well as some of the US, because a lot of these guys are now just getting a DigitalOcean IP
they're
and
jumping
using
over.
that, right? And so because it's so cheap, Vulture, you're seeing some on things like that, and there's not really a great, I mean, I would want some of these cloud providers. They should be able to identify this kind of traffic coming out. That it
I
would
mean,
be
if we
nice if
can
they were
do
more
it at our
responsible.
network level, at the receiving end, it's probably doable at the originating end too, for sure.
Absolutely, I'd really like to see more of that type
But
of
are these
policing.
people still looking for so context? Years and years ago, I would say 7 or 8, yours truly, me, turned on an Asterisk server, actually, with production trunking configuration, but development security. So it was just open.
Development security. That's a phrase
Yeah.
I'm going to use a lot.
Yeah, so there was like the password was just 1 2 3 4 for
Yeah.
so what happened is that we racked up $3,000 in traffic to Russian pay numbers. Those they used to be
Yeah.
$12 a minute or something, in half an hour, before someone noticed. The carrier actually noticed and turned off the username and password pair preventively. So they said, well, we blocked you because we're almost certain that's not legit traffic by the pattern. So kudos to the carrier. But is that still what they're looking for, mainly, like toll fraud and in general traffic usage, or is it something else these days?
My perspective is from what I see, right? And so I think someone like Sandro would have a better idea of what's
Like,
used.
there has to be a goal. There's not
Right.
everybody's a
So
script kiddie who wants to brag at a university that they hacked into a server.
what I'm seeing mostly is fraud control once they do get it, trying to make some calls and things like that. That being said, we're also seeing a tremendous amount of relay type attacks we were seeing on certain PBXs that would um, send foreign SIP. So let's say that would proxy it out. So let's say I sent to your FreeSWITCH, send this SIP to Fred at LOD.com or something, and then you would just forward it because it's not local to you. So there's some systems that would just flat out do that, period, without any authentication. and those are being used in attacks as well. So we started seeing that towards the end of last year. Ivan Yarko, who's been a great friend to the project, he did some analysis on it, which was amazing. There's so we were seeing that at the honeypot level, which was neat. Again, right now about 50% of the honeypot traffic that we're seeing is non-SIP, a lot of it being DNS, which I don't know why, but based on the DDoS attacks that we had last year, and seeing that traffic was very similarly used against them, it's of concern. And I'd like
probably
to know
trying to
more about that.
replay patterns that have worked in the past, like that DNS, DDoS attack of last year that were all about it was triggering a cascade of DNS requests, effectively, right? The short.
Well, some of it was DNS, and because it's an amplified attack. So if I know that you are responding to it and they're coming to it, then I can. I don't know if they're looking to see. Okay, well, look, I found a SIP server that that will respond with a, hey, that's an improper message when I send it to SIP. And so now let me find out who this IP address is and, do a ransom attack on them. If you don't, pay me
up
I'm
or
going to take
whatever.
you down. Yeah. So, I mean, that could be one angle, but there's definitely still the fraudulent activity, which is, why I definitely recommend that you use carriers that have a max daily or an alert or something that
feels
you can
like
control.
good old toll fraud is never going away, just because traffic will always be worth some amount of money, and as a result of that,
as long as it costs X amount of dollars to call Pakistan and Russia, then I'm going to try to. It's free if I can use your server.
In our case, it was actually someone my opinion is it was either someone extremely malicious, or they actually owned the extra toll number we called, right?
Yeah,
It was like a kind of hotline numbers that were. It was
so that they were
$12 per
making
minute.
money themselves. Oh,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
they probably owned that, which actually makes a lot of sense, because you can rack up. I mean, if you find someone who has just 10 channels, you're racking up 120 a minute just by pointing those
Yeah.
10 channels at the number. As long as the carrier doesn't notice it, it's huge money.
See, and I actually think that some of it in the future, I thought that stir and shaken would only increase this, because now if I can use your server
Wow, yeah.
to send my robocalls, then or my fraud calls, then
And
as
you're
an
on the
attack.
hook for it, because someone, if you got
Yeah.
complaints, you see you.
So it might not even be about fraud anymore. In terms of trying to save money, it might be just trying to use your systems to make inappropriate scamming calls.
Yeah, that's probably the case. It's there's been a huge increase in robocalls. To be fair, even in Europe, where we have more stringent laws, I get 2 or 3 a day.
It's
Just crazy,
ridiculous
yeah.
out there.
So, changing topics a little, because I asked you before the actual call. I am not a very good Kamailio technician. I need to learn a lot about Kamailio, and like me, there's a lot of people who will benefit a lot from knowing a little Kamailio. As an
Yeah.
expert, where would you get started? Like, how do I get from nothing to something that, I don't know, will forward calls to a FreeSWITCH server?
I'm taken back because every time, I'm honored. I've been doing this for 20 years, but still, it's when I hear expert, I just always look for who's behind me.
Well,
The the Kamailio sometimes can be daunting to people because of the need to know SIP. And my first recommendation to someone is to get a handle of SIP. Now, I know that with you, that's not a problem, right? Because you've
yeah.
been doing this for a couple of weeks now. But um, but for a lot of people, they don't even understand what they don't know yet. And the way that I got into SIP was as a lot of people do, where I'm using Asterisk and FreeSWITCH, and I see it. Oh, so now I know SIP, and then you realize you really don't. You kind of are familiar with some things, but you don't know the intricacies yet of what's a proxy. and what is what am I supposed to do? And the RFC for SIP, one of them is just enormous. It used to be the biggest RFC until Opus came around and said, here, hold my beer. But they're just big, complicated RFCs that make it's almost a deterrent to even read them. They're so big. So the first step is to just get familiar with SIP. Use something like Homer or SNGrep and start looking at the SIP ladder, how the call is being set up, what's expected. So here I make a call, I'm expecting maybe a 100 back from the server, or not, then maybe a 180 or a 183, and then, oh look, here's an answer, I get a 200, and then look, here's uh, an ACK coming back, and then wow, wait, that ACK isn't going there, so now that call's dropping in 31 and a half seconds, and you start learning these kind of things, and you're like, okay, then when you look at Kamailio as a system, it makes sense because it's just working through the SIP flow. That being said, we've gotten a lot better on Kamailio and having some tutorials out there. So if you went to the website of kamailio.org, there's a lot of resources for tutorials and explanations. There's a lot of people that are putting in templates and configs of examples on even some really hard things. I put up one, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, of converting TLS and SRTP to UDP and RTP, just to bridge those two, so that you could maybe bring remote phones in a secure way to your local PBX to allow work from home, for example. And then there's which Kamailio is great for, with Kamailio and RTP engine. It's an amazing bridge for something like that, and it's not that hard especially when there's a config already written for you. And then but thanks to Docker and Raspberry Pis, my best experience for people is to put it on one of those systems and play with it locally. It makes it a lot easier than having to first try to find a report. Docker makes it really fun to do it on your laptop or something like that. Pis are really strong. My office phone system right now is a Pi running Kamailio, another Pi running FreeSWITCH, and it's fantastic. It runs more calls than I ever need. I mean, even RTP engines on it. So it's the things that you could do with your own home little lab that allows you to then see, okay, well, what happens when I send this type of call to it? But in terms of the easiest way to start Kamailio, I'd say we do have a very, I would say just as easy to follow instructions as installing FreeSWITCH, as installing Kamailio, step by step, and then some of the tutorials on doing that. There's a knowledge base that has a lot of integrations with FreeSWITCH, for example, and how to have it stand in front of FreeSWITCH and still let FreeSWITCH handle all of the things that you may already have on there, like users and stuff like that, or and just use Kamailio for maybe SIP edge router or least cost routing or something like that.
Yeah, you can do. I mean, I think that's a good advice, and I think that's something that does help a lot. Like if you find Kamailio daunting, which to a degree extends to FreeSWITCH, in my opinion, Asterisk, to
Yeah.
go read a SIP tutorial first. There's no shortcuts. SIP is not a lot, to be fair. I mean, there's what 12 types of messages, of which 5 are relevant. And once you learn what the invite flow is, you're essentially already halfway to what you need to know, I will suppose, with the exception of maybe learning how registration works. So once you learn what the invite flow is and how registration actually works, you're probably learn all of SEP you need for the first 6 months.
Yeah, and then it's just aspects of, oh, okay, well, this is changing this user, this request user, and just learning some of the nomenclature is really helpful. So a good SIP tutorial will really help you immensely with FreeSWITCH, as well as Kamailio, OpenSIPs, any of the open source SIP servers that are out there. It'll even help you with WebRTC.
Oh yeah, true. It's got full support to WebRTC for sure. It's
Yep.
yeah, WebRTC has been a good ride so far, and we're having a lot of fun with it. So I think that everybody should try and set something up. So I
Yeah.
am a fan of SIP. I've used SIP for the longest time, and you can do SIP over WebRTC, of course, but the people generally separate them. Like I've been told by another guest on the podcast actually that SIP over WebRTC is not really WebRTC; it's SIP, and to a degree that's sort of true. Like WebRTC usually means you have signaling that's specific to the application or known standard, which to me is super weird because I'm still trying to figure out why WebRTC isn't just SIP over WebSockets.
Yeah. Which is what I mean, I would just roll my eyes at a comment like that. But yeah, so maybe it's technically true. I don't know, but I I see a lot of SIP over WebSockets for in
Yeah, I don't
production.
see
And
I don't see the reason why we had to not even create another signaling mechanism, but create a million ones that are incompatible with each other.
yeah, no, I mean we're finally getting to a place in where so many different systems are finally talking to each other. And we're not getting, oh well, Avaya doesn't do SIP in any way, which it never did. But now we're getting to a point where connecting to an Avaya system is not a problem. Connecting to Microsoft Teams isn't a problem. Connecting to FreeSWITCH talking to Asterisk was never really a problem, but now it's even more stable. Uh, any of the inner operations of bringing in a new carrier is almost insignificant, whereas 10 years ago it was a couple days effort to try to figure out what exactly they need. So to now say, okay, well, let me switch everything to a new system, we're finally getting some stability. Let's
It is,
keep
yeah,
with it.
it's great. Plus, the open source tools are really mature, and you can do a lot while only using that.
You can use a lot, and the community is great. I don't know of this community. If you ask for help, you generally get it. And if you're nice, you get good responses. There's still some people out there that shouldn't be talking to other people, but those are much fewer and far between. But mostly, if you go to a FreeSWITCH mailing list, or whatever you want, whether it's a IRC, but I see IRC going away ever since those changes. Um, or groups, or Slack, or whatever you want to use on that aspect. We
We've
have
had
a
good
Matrix.
success using Slack.
Yeah,
I've been a champion of setting up a Matrix server or a Matrix channel sometimes in the future for community, mostly because Slack is great, but in the end, it's not open source, and there's
we have
it can go away. Like say they decide they want to license communities. Now
yeah,
you suddenly lost maybe years of history. And there's also now really no real way to archive, which is also something that irks me a little because I've dug out stuff out of IRC logs years after.
exactly. Yeah, and so Kamailio, we have a Matrix room. We have a Matrix space as well. So there's we even have our dev meetings and everything in Matrix open to the world. It's we're choosing on those to be just plain text so that anyone can see them. They're archived. And anyone can join our Kamailio space if they'd like. And we're seeing more and more people come on Matrix. So I do like Matrix. That's been not as active as, well, it's been more active than IRC in the last year or so. Our mailing list for Kamailio is extremely active. So email is still very, very active on that one. And but I do like Matrix a lot. I'm a very big fan. I know Homer's
Yeah,
on Matrix as well. They have a pretty active channel.
I agree. Yeah, it's been a great project, and I was looking forward to FOSDEM, but well, still FOSDEM is still happening, but we'll just be watching from home.
Yeah, remote. I really want an in-person conference. I miss, again, this community means so much to me. I love it. I love the people in the community. It's been
Well, ClueCon is going to be in person in October. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, so
But
I'm excited. I'm looking forward to going to ClueCon. It's been
but I
2
really
years
miss
since I've been.
FOSDEM. FOSDEM has been good. Plus,
Yeah,
it's close for a change. I get to fly for an hour and a half instead of having to fly for 12 hours to the conference. But
which would be
on
nice.
top of that, FOSDEM is super fun. There's so many people just walking around Brussels, and the years where there was the most people, it's like, well, 2017 and 18 were peak years, of course.
Yeah.
And you could literally just walk into a group of people in a public park, just sitting down with laptops, hacking away at something. And it wasn't always good stuff. So
You know, I really wanna go. I've never been to a FOSDEM, and I really wanna go.
it's organized chaos. So it's really just people. So it's people drinking beer at 9 a.m. because the bar just sells at any time. And there's so many topics, so many rooms going on, and so much different information being disseminated that every time I go there, I end up staying in the voice over IP room for a few hours. Then I wander and end up learning about, I don't know, an open source 3D video engine that I didn't even know existed and I will never use. But now I know
Yeah.
it exists and it's great. And then I walk in another room and it's someone who's developed an open source printer. So they're showing their hardware. And
Oh, wow.
yes, which I will never need, but who knows? Maybe that's not true. So that's how it works. It's not very focused, but it's super fun.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, Fred, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure seeing you as usual, and I hope I'll meet you in person soon.
Yeah, I definitely miss seeing you, so I thank you so much for having me on, and I really look forward to, seeing everyone in person and, shaking
So
hands again.
projects we reference it are apiban.org for the REST interface to help you manage your spam and the attacks on your SIP servers, and of course Kamailio.org, which doesn't need any introductions, but it's a great starting point for all things Kamailio. Again, Fred Posner, thank you for joining us today,
My
and
pleasure, Luca. Thank you.
for the rest of the audience, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.